Hooray! Joti Brar's back. And at the perfect time, the imperialists are up to their usual antics, and Joti is going to decipher what's happening and why for us. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here with the one and only Joti Brar. And we've got really exciting things to talk about. And I want to get Joti's angle and interpretation based on, history and other things about what's happening in the collapse of the Ukraine project. Joti, thank you and welcome back. Thanks for coming and welcome back.
Thank you, Garland. Nice to be back with you.
All right, now here's what I'm going to throw at you. This is the perfect question for an international expert on imperialism. This is what I was thinking, Joti. When the U.S. empire went into Ukraine, and what did they do? Well, Joe Biden's son, he joins Burisma or whatever, right? He's filling his pockets. Amos Hochstein is the U.S. envoy to Israel right now. Amos Hochstein was working for the U.S. State Department. He quit his job and he went to Ukraine and he joined the board of Naftogaz, to be on the board of directors, filling his pockets. I mean, I could go on and on. So but what happens? The U.S. overthrows the government of Ukraine, and all of these literally U.S. government officials and their children go in and start picking the bones of Ukraine. Now, here's why that's important. So now Trump is, hey, let's sign a deal so we can get all the mineral rights, port rights, everything for Ukraine for all eternity. And there's discussions on the internet that when Keir Starmer signed some 100-year deal with the Ukrainians, part of it was taking the money from their port. So my point is this: all of this business about we're standing for democracy in Ukraine, we have to help those poor little Nazis defend themselves. But when it comes down to it, the imperialists go in there, they're going to fill their pockets and might I add, the Democrats are like, it's terrible. Trump's taking advantage of Ukraine. You went in and started stealing their money on the way in. Trump's going to steal their money on the way out. Keir Starmer standing on the side. You know what Keir Starmer reminds me of? A lion kills the antelope, and the hyenas are sitting there waiting for the lion to finish with the carcass so they can get theirs. And the buzzards are waiting for That's what the imperialists and their junior imperialists and all are like. This is the most obvious expression of economic imperialism aligned with the other evil deeds that they were working on in Ukraine. Joti, what do we need to know about this?
Absolutely. You're putting your finger on something really important, Garland, which is that imperialism isn't just like a foreign policy. Imperialism is a global system of capitalist exploitation. So imperialism is capital developed to the stage of monopoly and capital developed to the stage of the world, right? So capitalism encompasses a world market, and imperialism is an economic system which has been perfected. It's built a machinery which is perfected for sucking wealth from the entire planet and funneling it back through the hands into the pockets of a very tiny class of the owners of finance capital, which is situated mainly in the USA, whether that's New York, Washington, London, Berlin, Paris. These are still the main centers of finance capital today. And this is where all the loot of the world ends up. And this is what the extraction machine is made to do, to bring that wealth into those places in the form of profit. So this is what imperialism is. It's a wealth extraction machine. It's a loot machine. I was in India and I picked up a book from my dad's bookshelf about the East India Company. And this was the world's first example of a corporation that got bigger than the country it came from. Got so big that the country it came from had to put its resources at the disposal of the company. But the company's motivation for everything it did was profits, was the bottom line. It was the shareholders. It wasn't the good of either Britain or India. What it was interested in was what's going to make us the most profit. And it perfected the art of siphoning, sucking out the wealth of India back into the pockets of its shareholders in Britain, right? And it was the first example of a too big to fail corporation. They had bailouts. They actually nearly failed. And there was a point where they were nearly failing in the 18th century, I think. And the rumors that they might be failing or that their returns weren't as good as had been expected, a bunch of banks in Europe collapsed on news that the dividends on the latest, shares of the East India Company weren't going to be as good as they thought. The projected returns hadn't been as good. Something had happened. Oh, it was a famine in Bengal. That's right. So there was this kind of, famine in Bengal, which came about because of the East India Company. The practices had affected the projected profits of the East India Company. A bunch of banks collapsed. The company was massively indebted. It went to the government, said, we need a loan, we need a loan. No, now we need a bigger loan. Now we need a bigger loan. They were too big to fail. So this is what monopoly capitalism looks like, Garland. It's a loot extracting machine. That was a long-winded way of getting to your point. In Ukraine, we saw exactly the same thing we've seen everywhere. Now, it's really fascinating to see how when Donald Trump just makes it explicit, like he did in Syria, we're here for the oil. Now, anybody with a brain who's really been paying attention would have known already that imperialism was interested in the Middle East for the last 100 years because of the oil, right? Donald Trump just doesn't see why you can't just say that. He's kind of brash. That's why they don't like him, really. He is a member of the ruling class, but he's brash. And he's not a trained politician. Politicians in this day and age are actors. They're frontmen. They're people who present the system a certain way. Donald Trump doesn't see why you should have to. That's what I read into the way he behaves. I mean, let me just say, I don't know him. I've never met him. I'm not his psychiatrist, right? I'm not a Trump whisperer. But what I see from the kind of pronouncements that he makes about all kinds of things is he doesn't see why America, as the biggest bully in the playground, the biggest imperialist on the planet, shouldn't just be upfront about what it needs and what it wants. What's interesting is this is US imperialism in decline. US imperialism, when it was on the rise, took a totally opposite approach. I was just talking to my brother Ranjit earlier today, and he reminded me of a quote that my father used to really like. And it came from your president, Theodore Roosevelt, the one who was president of America, I think, before World War I. And he had he made a quotation or said something that the country should. I'm going to get it wrong, so apologies to all the pedants out there who know this better than me. But speak softly and carry a big stick, right? What does that really mean? It means that you use nice words. You present your best face to people. You do your best PR presentation of the system and the class that you represent, but you're backed up by real power, and people know it. And when you need to use it, you use it. But it's in reserve behind your diplomacy and your presentation. And the presentation is important. And the presentation became more and more important. We have to recognize that the period during which the USA has been the world's foremost imperialist power wasn't like the classical colonial period when the Europeans were becoming big monopoly powers, building their physical empires. They openly said, we're better than everybody else. The other lands that we're finding are essentially empty. Those people don't even count as people. They're good as fodder And if they're no good to be exploited, they can be wiped out and replaced with people who can be exploited. You know, they shipped slave labor and indentured labor all around the world, didn't they, when they'd wiped out indigenous peoples who were not suitable for enslavement. You know, their mentality was all this is all empty, and it all belongs to whoever can grab it. And the reason they could have that view was they had such a technological dominance over the societies they encountered that they didn't need to consider them as opponents. Right? So to them, the world outside of Europe was empty. And it was just a question of fighting with each other to grab bits of it. Now, America became a strong imperialist power as Europe was declining. Europe basically holed itself below the waterline with World War I. World War I really was World War I gave birth to the October Revolution. World War I was this massive conflagration where the competition between the imperialist powers just came into the open, and they threw everything into that conflict. You know, so much of their men, their material, their finance, they were fighting over, Garland, who gets to control the loot of the world, who gets to have the biggest empire. They told their people they were defending the rights of small nations and democracy and, you know, the fatherland and whatever else things they said to one another. But what they were fighting about on the battlefields of Flanders was about who gets to keep control of the colonies, who gets to keep control of the loot of the world. America came up as Europe was going down. And it became a replacement for the Europeans. But the pivotal fact about it is it came as this rising imperialist power because it hadn't been bogged down in World War I. And World War I and World War II, both of those wars, the US industrialists and monopolists, financiers got rich by funding both sides and by keeping up war production when everybody else was, you know, having to were having problems and their economies and infrastructure were being destroyed. So the USA was gradually becoming more and more the dominant power through that whole period. But this was the period, this is going to bore people who watch me regularly, this was the period after the October Revolution, Garland. And so presentation of imperialism has been really, really important. It's not just a nice to have thing. Most of the ruling class knows this. It's super important that you're able to present to your own people a vision of what their country stands for and represents that they feel they can get behind. And you don't just say, well, we're going over there and you know, those people don't count because they're not civilized like us. October Revolution and the advance of socialism and the ideas of socialism, the world's full of people in the West, Garland, who think they hate communism. And yet they have in their heads a whole load of ideas that were put there by communist revolutionaries. They don't even know it. But when they think that it's not right that there should be sexism and racism, they think that because of the October Revolution. When they think it's not right that big countries should go around bullying smaller countries, they think that because of the October Revolution. A lot of people don't realize that, you know, when they think that everybody should have a say in how society is run, they think that because of the October Revolution. You know, the ruling class in the West made huge concessions after World War II, and they bought social peace because revolution was knocking at their door. And part of it was they reimagined themselves. They made a new story for themselves and what they stood for as ruling classes and as countries. And when they talked about Western democracy as opposed to socialist tyranny, which was the narrative that came out after World War II, it was the new West that they created in their narratives was one that actually encapsulated a whole load of values that the workers had imbibed through socialism. equality and fairness and, you know, everybody having the right to a home and a job and, you know, security and peace and all these things. These are all things you get from socialism. They're not things you get from capitalism. Capitalism can't provide them. But it looked as if capitalism was providing them for a little while. Anyway, I'm not going to go on too long about that. We've talked about those things lots of times before. But my point is that the period during which the US empire has been the predominant imperialist power in the world has been a period, it's been during this period of socialist revolution and socialist advance. Now, the fact that we've had a temporary reverse in that direction of travel doesn't change the fact that that's the era we live in. We live in the era that came after, that began in 1917 and will continue until there's no more capitalism and no more imperialism in the world. This is our era. And the presentation of imperialism matters for its stability, its social stability at home. First of all, it has to be able to pay its workers enough in social dividend, or enough of its people, enough in a social dividend that they don't want to make the revolution. And it also has to make them believe in the country and its mission and its values. But increasingly we're finding, and, you know, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, they started to feel like maybe they don't need to worry so much about the narrative control. Socialism's not really a threat anymore. They've basically convinced their workers that there's no future outside capitalism. So at the same time as they're ramping up their looting of the rest of the world and undoing the gains of the welfare state and the post-war consensus period at home, they've also been getting much more overt and much less subtle about what they get up to abroad. If you look at when they established, which is what they're now de-establishing, this National Endowment for Democracy and this whole regime change machinery, when they set it up, they considered it to be a strength that, because they used to do all that stuff before through the CIA, covert operations. And then they set up the NED and all these other George Soros Open Society Foundation, all this, you know, plethora of agencies which were openly admitted to, which had websites which tell you what things they're funding, which they took down recently, interestingly. But, you know, it used to be in the public domain that they were doing these activities. And this was considered to be a strength. It's like, and the Guardian used to write articles praising the brilliance of America's regime change machinery. Like back in sort of the 90s and the early 2000s, it was openly talked about how good it was that the Americans had this ability to change the outcome of other people's elections. Right? And then they started to see how this was becoming increasingly unpopular and how people around the world were waking up to the fact that this is what they do and that we need to start noticing it, paying attention to it. There's a whole layer of kind of independent journalists in the West that were constantly revealing the mechanics of how this machinery works. You've got people like Brian Beletic, Kit Clarenberg, there's many others. And this has become a kind of a busted flush, this machine now, which I think is the real reason why they're getting rid of it, right? But you know, I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but we were talking about what we were talking about, the presentation of the thing. Now, what I see with Donald Trump right now, you know, you talked about Joe Biden's, you know, son going straight into Ukraine 2014, that as soon as the coup happened, they're in there, they've got their hands on the most important resources and they're looting them, right? Because that's what imperialism does. So the idea that there's something shocking about Donald Trump's government saying there's resources in Ukraine and we want to be sure that we're getting hold of them. It doesn't matter what stupid things he says about why we should get them. We need our money's worth or any of this crap. Imperialism always gets its money's worth. Otherwise, it wouldn't be spending its money. Right? The point is, what it tries to do is get the public to pay the expenses while it takes the benefits, the profits. Right? So that's the whole, again, that's how you maximize profit. You know, you tell the public that they need to stand with Ukraine and spend as much money as possible and print money and suffer inflation because of all the printed money and suffer inflation because of what you've done to energy prices and suffer and suffer budget crisis and austerity because we have to send more to you and more to Ukraine. Public pays. But if you think the ruling class that directed that hasn't been getting paid through this operation, you're not paying attention. They're always getting paid. That's why they do it. But they're also involved in what they thought was a down payment. So they've been looting Ukraine's resources, and of course, through the military budgets, they've been coining it, right? But they were imagining that what they were doing was putting a down payment on a much bigger looting bonanza, on everything that Ukraine has, including in the east, which is where most of the mineral wealth is, and on Russia. And they're crying their eyes out now because they failed. They're not destroying Russia. They're not going to get their looting bonanza in Russia, or not anytime soon. They haven't got the bit of Ukraine where all the real wealth is. And now the little bit that's still under Kiev control, Kiev in quotes, right? Because really it's the CIA that runs Kiev. But the little bit that's still under Western control, as far as I can see, they're basically fighting over it, right? Who gets to have this bit that's here? But the idea that there's something kind of shocking or outrageous, but what I just want to come back to before you come back in, Garland, is this. In the beginning of America's rise, they were all about, yes, we've got the stick, but we use diplomacy and we present ourselves as a friend, and we try to get our way softly. We know we're strong, but in the period where Europe's declining and everybody, the people around the world were very antagonistic towards the European colonial powers, America saw a lot of its strength as presenting itself not as a colonial power, although it was one. It tried to present itself as often as possible. It didn't always do it, but as often as possible as a friend, not like those nasty, dastardly Brits. And they would remind people, oh, we had to fight our war of independence from Britain too. We know how awful they are. We're with you, and they softly, big stick behind. Now Donald Trump's just like, I've got a really big stick. You shout, bluster, threaten. We want your stuff. Who are you to stand up to us? Just give us your stuff. So in actual fact, it's just mask off, isn't it? Now, if you are someone who has a vested interest in the maintenance of this system, that will be upsetting to you, that the mask is coming off. If you're someone who wants to see the end of this system, why should you be upset if the system is represented by somebody who makes it so clear what the system's real interests are? Now, that doesn't make Donald Trump our friend, but like the idea that he is worse for the working class than all the other, type of leaders that they have had or could have, I find kind of ludicrous. And in fact, to me, I welcome the chaos, if you like, that's caused in the ruling circles. Donald Trump is a sign of the splits and divisions within the ruling class in the USA and around the world. He's also an exacerbating factor in those splits and divisions. There's a deep economic crisis, and there's an argument amongst the ruling class in the USA, as everywhere, about how best to survive the crisis and who should pay the price, the biggest price, and what is the strategy. And it's what's very clear is there's not one clear, coherent strategy. There's a lot of fighting going on, a lot of jostling for position, and a lot of, what we see coming from the person of Donald Trump is a lot of bluster and shouting, a lot of fantasizing about how people around him would like things to be. That doesn't mean that's how they are going to be, but you see a certain kind of like saying the quiet part out loud, a lot of loud thinking, a lot of saying what people used to only say behind closed doors out in public. and a lot of, I think some people think it's like very clever negotiating, but say the most extreme thing you can think of and then kind of see what happens and see if saying I'm going to take Greenland means that, Denmark will very quickly agree that you can put bases anywhere you like in Greenland, that type of thing. But fundamentally, what we're looking at is imperialism in crisis and decline. And that's a very positive situation actually for workers, but they've got to take advantage of it. We can't just be spectators.
Yeah, I agree. I had something else I wanted to ask you about, and it was important, but I got so engrossed in the things that you were saying that I lost it for a second. Oh, here's another interesting thing about the Trump MAGA phenomenon, right? As we watch the decline of this world power, Donald Trump came out and there was a term, the blue collar billionaire. You talk about a contradiction, right? But basically it was, he speaks the language of the masses, which he does, might I add. He does speak the language of the masses, right? He speaks the language of the masses. He knows how to talk to them, unlike the, the liberal powers who are, they're like the feudal noble families. They haven't a clue how to talk to the littles, right? And they have nothing but contempt for him. Not that he does or doesn't. I'm just saying their contempt is outrage. Just they bleed contempt for the great unwashed hoi polloi masses. And he just kind of is like, come on, guys, let's be friends with the masses. They have a very important purpose. They have to like cut our grasses and raise our children, right? Donald Trump did this whole thing, and then like a couple of months just before he gets elected, in comes literally the richest man in the world to lead the charge. And I'm looking at the MAGA people and I'm like, you guys think that Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, being the point man for this operation means that he's looking out for you? I looked at it like this, Jody, and I haven't had a chance to really discuss this with you. I looked at the Trump, and I've said this on a lot of my things. I looked at the Trump inauguration, and they're sitting in the front row, Elon Musk, Tim Cook of Apple, Jeff Bezos. I call them the tech bros, right? Like $1.5 trillion in money, and there's like 5 guys sitting there, right? And I'm like, that's the board of directors right there. Those are the people that are making it. If you think Trump's making these decisions, you are very wrong. These are the board of directors. Elon Musk is wandering around the treasury, and I'm like, well, of course he is. It's like, that's his ATM. That's like you going to the ATM. He goes to, they're like, we must stop him. I'm like, no. You ain't stopping him. What do you think? Some judge is going to stand up to this guy? That's not happening. I looked at it and I said simply, we had a bunch of knuckle draggers and they were like, we're going to go smash into Russia and then we'll slam into China and then we'll beat them into submission. And now we got a bunch of tech billionaires that are like, yeah, we'll probably die in a nuclear war if we do that. Let's take a different angle. That's the way it seems to me. Let's take a different angle, right? And Musk comes in and he's like firing all of these, by the tens of hundreds of thousands government employees, which will probably have to be replaced by AI, and he'll probably get the contract. But there's this contradiction. A guy who's like, we've got to save money with the federal government. He's got like $18 billion in government contracts for wasteful things. Literally, he's got this SpaceX thing, right? And they were like saying, yes, he was able to land this. He sent this rocket up and then it landed. And I'm like, I think Isaac Newton figured that out a long time ago, that if something goes up, it's liable to come down at some point. So he's figured out that if you jump off a roof, you'll never go up. You'll probably come back down, and you can get like a $5 billion contract for that and brag about what you've done. And everybody's like, he's a genius. He sent a rocket up and the rocket came back down. But at any rate, so he's got billions in contracts, but he's saving them lots of money by firing working class federal employees in a might I add one last thing, in a country where that's really the only jobs left in the United States, where you'll have like a decent payment, salary, you'll have an actual retirement, and you'll have decent medical benefits. That's like the last thing is government. Other than that, forget it. The rest of them is you're working in a mini mart selling snacks or something for minimum wage. And they're going to wipe that out now. And I'm like, well, obviously if he wanted to save the government money, couldn't he give up his billions and billions of dollars in government contracts for sending rockets up and then back down for no apparent reason? Anyway, let me throw all that at you. Your thoughts? Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, is leading the charge for the little guy. I'm so happy. Jody.
It's amazing the job they've done on Elon Musk, isn't it? They must be very, very sure that he's their guy. The amount that he's been like finessed and created into this kind of front person for every kind of technical genius. This whole thing that, you know, technical genius comes from one guy and he has a vision and, you know, he made it on his own, and all of the things they say about him are wrong and lies, and he's basically got rich off of, as you said, government money. He started his life, you know, with considerable fortune from his father, who was a bourgeois in South Africa. He's not some little guy who made it big. He's a small bourgeois who made it into a huge bourgeois off the back of, you know, the right moment for certain, you know, technological activities. He happened to be, you know, this happens in there's always a gold rush with new technologies, isn't there? And in the era of monopoly, very quickly, a whole load of players becomes one or two players. That's how it works. A whole load of people went down and we don't know their stories. And Elon and Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos did not go down and we know their stories, right? But it's not because they're particular geniuses. They all had parental money behind them. They all had people who bailed them out when they failed, and
The government
helped them have another shot. Well, family and then government, yeah. You know, so all of that myth making, you know, is just that. It's all about selling working class people on the dream that anybody can make it, which is a total lie. There is no proletarian who is amongst the ranks of the super rich. It is not a thing. It doesn't happen. It hasn't happened. Find me one. All the people they say made it big from, you know, the rags to riches stories, they're all people who started with money. None of them are people who started with nothing in a council house, you know, on a, you know, working in the steelworks or the docks or the mines. So, yeah, there's that. Clearly.
I'll say this. I once had a guy that I knew. He was a Greek shipping magnate. He owned numerous oil tankers, talking to me about how he started from, you know, the bottom when he was 15. He borrowed money from his father, who owned a bank. Opened his first restaurant. He started from the bottom. I mean, and now he's at the top. He started off, yes, the first one, and I did this, and I made this restaurant happen, and then I borrowed money from my father to buy my first ship. I'm like, oh, why did I think of that?
Any one of us, Colin.
Yeah, I should have borrowed. If only I'd have borrowed money from my dad to buy a ship, then I could have probably made it. I didn't have the mental wherewithal. So yeah, they started from their idea of the bottom is far different than ours. I'll just put it like that.
Why did I not think to walk into the bank and explain to them why they needed to lend me, you know, 15 million for a ship? I've got a really good idea of what I can do with the ship. You just got to lend me this amount of money. I'm good for it. I'm definitely good for it. Yeah, can you imagine the forms? So anyway, rags to riches, not a thing. Elon Musk, not your friend. Yes, this lineup of tech people at the inauguration, I've also found fascinating. And what I found super fascinating is I think this whole attempt to orient the Trump presidency as a kind of, you know, we are going to reinforce and reinvent the USA's technical advantage over the rest of the world, technological advantage, and the way to do it. And clearly, President Trump has been sold on this as an idea, but the people around him have sold themselves, each other, and a big section of the chattering classes on this idea. And the idea is AI, as they call it, artificial intelligence, which is not AI, by the way. It's not what anybody who's normal would think of as artificial intelligence. It's like large language model, put a lot of stuff in and it spurts something out at you. Anyone who uses it knows if you want something meaningful, it's shit, right? I'm sure it'll get better. I'm sure it'll get better for things like translation. It'll be super useful. And there's little things it can do, right? But anyway, it's early days and it's definitely not artificial intelligence. It's a large language computing model. By the by, they've done a big job on telling everybody it's artificial intelligence. And they've done a big job in telling everybody that the USA is far ahead of the rest of the world, and that this is something, they've done this huge marketing campaign to make us think this is something we all need access to. Every one of us, every company, everyone in the world has to be using AI. It's the only way forward. It's the must-have new thing, and you'll be left behind without it. And we're the only ones who've got it. And I really think, Garland, that they bet the farm, really bet the farm. They've got so much money to invest, and they needed to be making profits. And they've massively inflated all the tech stocks on the basis that the most advanced microchips and the most advanced ChatGPT type model, like OpenAI produced, not so OpenAI, are monopolized by a few US companies. And the whole of the rest of the world is going to need these and have to pay us tribute. And so we'll be able to charge the world what we want, and we'll be ahead of everybody, and we'll be raking in money because everybody will feel they need this tool. And then DeepSeek happened. And NVIDIA chips, which is the chips that we thought that you can't do artificial intelligence ChatGPT models without these chips. This Chinese company did it quickly, more quickly, more efficiently, with less computing power, with lower specification chips, and they blew the whole model out of the water. And I will be very surprised if there are not further ramifications economically for the USA as a result of this, because they've been really telling themselves that they can stay ahead of China technologically, and that they can charge the world tribute for the fact that they own this technology and everybody needs to use it. And now everybody doesn't need to use it. But the DeepSeek company didn't just produce something that was quick and cheap. They gave it to the world as open source. Anybody can have it for nothing.
And I think it was deliberate. It was, I'm big on timing when it comes to politics, timing and symbolism, etc. And the fact that they released it like a week after Donald Trump came to power, a week, to me, was they understood what was going on. They saw the tech bros there. They knew the plan, and they said, "No, okay, well, fair enough." Those darn socialists come up again, and they're like, "How about, let me look through my hand. Oh, here's an ace. Why don't we drop this on the table?" I think the Chinese did that intentionally. I think Trump did a lot of bluster about, oh, we're going to, put the Chinese in their place once and for all, and blah, blah, blah. Maybe not militarily, maybe, but whatever. And we'll have the greatest technology. And then he says, and we'll put $500 billion into AI, and then we'll have it. And the Chinese are like, boink. They dropped this on the table and threw a monkey wrench, or as they would say, we say a monkey wrench in the works. As they would say in England, they threw a spanner in the works. I think it was intentional move on their part.
Well, I don't claim to have inside information on that sort of thing. It certainly was lovely timing. And
interesting timing. Interesting. How about we go with that?
Interesting timing in interesting times, Garland.
Yeah.
And, but I think it's important. So on the one hand, they were really hoping for a big bonanza off the back of monopolizing technology, because that's part of the imperialist model, is that you have this huge wealth extraction machine, and it's based on always having the most advanced technology, because that gives you two things. Number one, it gives you the ability to have the most advanced armies, which means you can bully and blackmail everybody. And number two, it means anybody around the world who needs access to your technology has to come through you. And you're always dominant because of that. So that's the whole way imperialism works. And of course, October Revolution, which spread to China. And now China is upholding the light of October in the world. And it began the process of undermining the technological dominance of imperialism. And that process is inexorable and irreversible. And no amount of bluster from the US ruling class is going to change that. And I think the Chinese certainly reminded the world that that is the case. They've been focused. They're not focused on catching up because they want to compete or outcompete. They simply want to develop. And in order to develop and stay sovereign in a world where imperialism wants to bring you down, you have to catch up and overtake. You have to. You don't have any choice. It's not that they want to do America down. They want to protect themselves. They want to not be able to be blackmailed and bullied and held to ransom and forced to pay tribute to the owners of the high technology. And they know that ultimately, in order to be sovereign in the world of imperialism, you must catch up and overtake technologically. including militarily, but especially, you know, technology covers everything, including the military. But you have to catch up and overtake, and there's no way around it. Stalin made a speech in 1931 to business executives in the Soviet Union, you know, business executives, not in the capitalist sense, but in the sense of they were running, you know, state enterprises in 1931. And he said to them, we have got 10 years. He said, we are 50 or 100 years behind the West. We've got 10 years to catch up or we will go under. And he was right practically to the day, because it was 10 years later that the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union. And during that time, they threw everything they had into building up their industrial base, building up their agriculture, building up their arms industry, developing their technology at the most lightning pace, because they knew their survival depended on it. And of course, they were absolutely right. And you see the same thing with China. They put so much emphasis on developing new talent, young people in the STEM subjects, right? And developing homegrown industry, homegrown technological developments, a homegrown space program, homegrown robotics, homegrown artificial intelligence, all of the, you know, all the cutting edge homegrown microchip manufacturing. They said, we won't be sovereign without these things. We're not going to be able to protect our revolution, our country, our independence, unless the West can't bully us or hold us to ransom. And that's the whole point. And that, of course, is why the imperialists and the USA in particular are desperate to bring China down. Now, when we look at the shift in emphasis with the new regime in the White House, we have to recognize the realities of the situation that we're in. China's always been, or not always, there's no always, is there? But in the recent period, remember Obama, pivot to Asia? It's been recognized for quite a long time in recent times by the US ruling class that China is their main target. The question is, what's the best way to bring it down? They tried internally with Tiananmen Square. That was very much a provocation from outside forces. Tiananmen Square. It was not a homegrown revolution. There was a homegrown protest at the heart of it, but it was jumped on, expanded, and massaged by a lot of outside interference and manipulation. That was stopped. And the Chinese Communist Party learned some very serious lessons at that point. They said, well, if we want to protect our system, our social system, and our country, you know, we have to recognize the dangers of what's just happened here, and you know, get on top of our game. And there's been a lot more mobilizing of the Chinese masses since that time, and a lot more efforts made to make sure that they are benefiting from what's going on in China since that time. So we see China developing very, very rapidly. China was, so what, like we said, Obama was focused, wanted, let me express this right, sorry. Obama became president at a time when the US ruling class had decided we need to focus away from the Middle East and onto China. The Middle East is sucking up too much resources. We're not winning, we're bogged down. Sound familiar? We're not winning, we're bogged down. We need to refocus. China is quietly rising over there, and we're focusing all our means on the Middle East, and it's not even working. So pivot to Asia was the new response to that. Well, what we're seeing with the Trump regime is very much the same thing. A big enough section of the ruling class has said, look, you told us Russia was going to be a soft target. You told us that bringing down Russia would make it easier to bring down China. And we let you have a go. We put Victoria Nuland in charge of basically everything. We gave all the money possible. We lined up all the people who really believe in destroying Russia. We put everything we had. Hasn't worked. But China is still over there and it's still rising. And China's our main target. So we need to get out of this thing and refocus. And I don't believe that there's been some big rational kind of realization in the White House that, oh, we definitely can't take on China militarily. We're going to have to just kind of deal with them or whatever. I think that there's a real desire to refocus on China. Yes, I don't think they have a totally worked out plan of how to bring China down, but the goal remains to bring down, to balkanize and destroy China one way or another. And I think I saw a clip by Ben Norton recently, and he made a very interesting point that, you know, Rubio gave a speech recently, I forget where he talked about multipolar world, and everybody went, yeah, the White House has realized we live in a multipolar world. But Ben Norton made the point that I think was very important, that when the US ruling elites say multipolar world, they don't mean what China means when China says it, or Russia means when Russia says it, or Nicaragua means when Nicaragua says it, or Venezuela or Cuba, or, you know, all the people from the oppressed world. When they say multipolar world, they mean one where small countries don't get bullied by big countries. They mean one of equality between nations and an end to imperialist rampaging the globe. What Marco Rubio was clearly saying was, okay, we recognize that Russia and China are also powers, and we'll have to deal with the fact that they're also powers. But his version, the imperialist version of that is, oh, we're back to a World War I situation where we've got three big powers fighting it out, right? Inter-imperialist conflict. And they like to present to us Russia's imperialist, China's imperialist, but Russia is not trying to invade the world and control it and suck its resources. China is definitely not trying to, you know, loot the resources of the world. China is trying to live in peace and help others to do the same. China is trying to develop and defend its sovereignty and provide for its people. For China, ultimately, development is about raising the living conditions of its people. But in order to do that, they have also to defend their sovereignty, which is why so much always ends up going into, you know, the very highest tech and the highest tech weaponry and all the rest of it, because if you don't defend your sovereignty, you can't do anything for your people. So these things, unfortunately, while imperialism continues to exist, the need to spend money on and focus on defense and arms is, you know, is kind of paramount for any state, because the imperialists won't leave you alone. And we certainly saw that with Syria recently. So I don't believe that there's been a kind of, oh, we'll just do business with China and we won't try to go to war anymore. I don't think it's even possible, even if, you know, there might be one or two people around Trump. Trump himself might think that that's a kind of just, you know, sensible, pragmatic thing to do. But imperialism is in crisis, and the crisis hasn't gone away, and it's not getting better by itself. If the imperialists don't get a massive looting bonanza, they're going down. And it's not going to be nice. And, you know, the more desperate they get, the more bloodthirsty they will get, you know. And I don't think we should read into this kind of walking away from the Ukraine debacle a kind of like, oh, imperialism has a new sheriff in town and it's got a new aspect, and now it's not a warmongering system, and now we've got people in, now the people in the White House are logical and they see sense and they can understand that they can't win these wars, and they face up for imperialism. And as a system, it's not capable of understanding, oh, well, we can't win the war, so we better not wage it then. You know, the logic of the system is such that it must wage wars to keep expanding, protecting the possibility of profit taking in it. And it can't just say, oh, well, China, never mind. It turns out we can't beat you, so we'll just join you and respect you. And you know, that isn't how it's going to be, Garland. And I just want to make one point, if I may, about that. Because something I find kind of frustrating is the way that so many people who really want the world to be different and really see that change is needed, they allow the ruling class to control their minds. And what I mean by that is they get sucked into just being news junkies and giving all their time and attention to the distraction machine of the news cycle, and trying to become kind of, at this point in time, Trump whisperers. You know, Trump said this, what does it really mean? Trump said this, what does it really mean? And listen to all the people who'll tell you all the different things that they think what it means that Trump said, right? It swallows all of your time and attention. And it puts you in a position where you're cheering because you read something good for the people out of what's happening, or crying because you read something bad about it. Or you do the same with President Xi or President Putin. But fundamentally, you're denying your own ability to affect anything. You're saying, I am a passive spectator to all of this, and all I can do is follow what people are saying and try and work out whether it's good or bad, whether I should feel happy or sad. You know, ultimately, we have to remember Donald Trump is a member of the ruling class, and he's acting on behalf of that class. He's a symptom, like we said earlier, of the crisis and the disarray, the dissension in the camp of the ruling class. And the chaos that's emanating from the ruling class now is something that's actually pretty positive, but only if we stop being passive onlookers and start to have some agency ourselves. As a class, we have to recognize that all the changes we want are not going to come from the hands of the enemy class. They're going to come because we organize and take them and make them happen. That, you know, no matter how rotten and decaying and chaotic this system becomes, the dissent, without us acting and coming together and organizing revolutionary forces, what we're going to descend into is going to be barbarism. It is not going to be an emergence into a lovely, bright new future granted to you by some scion of the ruling class. That is not how social revolution happens. I think a lot of people understand that a revolution is needed, but the idea of actually organizing one is just so terrifying. It feels like such a big job that rather than saying, well, okay, if that's what needs doing, well, okay, I would prefer not to be starting from here, but here is where we are. So what's the thing I can do that's in front of me that takes us a step forward? Instead of taking that approach that every step forward, you know, is a step forward, right? You've got to start from where you are and start going forward. Start getting educated, start getting organized, work out what needs doing, work out how to join with other people to start to make those changes. Instead of having that mentality, they're like, oh, that job is way too big. And so they look for saviors, they look for messiahs, and they turn politics and global affairs into they allow the ruling class, because they do it to us, this whole culture wars thing. They allow the ruling class to shape narratives for us and turn the news into infotainment and really pick teams like we're following a baseball season or a football season, you know, and you cheer for your side, but fundamentally, you know, you're in the stalls, you're in the stands. You just like it's basically nothing to do with you. You might sing a song, stand up and cheer, wave your scarf, sit down again. But what happens on the pitch, you didn't have any involvement in. You know, now we have to stop thinking of ourselves as passengers, as spectators, as consumers. Ultimately, this world that we want to create, that we need, if we're not going to sink down into barbarism, has to be created by us. It is the masses that make history. It's not the great men. It's not the ruling elites. It is the mass of the people. And I just feel frustrated sometimes, Garland, that there's so much, you know, what feels to me like, you know, arguing on the head of a pin. Everybody wants to discover, what does it mean that Donald Trump said this? What does it mean that he said that? It's like, well, yes, let's see what it tells us about the big picture. But fundamentally, the even bigger picture is there's a class war going on. You know, what we're looking at is the ruling class trying to work out, or the ruling class arguing amongst itself and jostling for position, because this crisis is affecting the whole economy. And they're trying to survive. And how do they try to survive in a system that's marked by competition? They try to survive at one another's expense. So the big try to pass on the burden to the small, and the small go down, right? That's amongst capitalists. And then big nations try to pass it on to smaller nations. And smaller nations can go down, and that's okay, right? We'll just buy up what's left afterwards. The big are eating the small all the time as the crisis envelops. But more than anything, the people who feel the pain the first and the most are the poor and the oppressed. The people who are really being forced to bear the burden of this crisis are the working class and the oppressed peoples of the planet. And we can't just sit on the side and act like there's nothing we can do as our livelihoods are forced down and down and down and down, and we're expected to just, become, I don't know what's the right word to use there, Garland. We're expected to just, sink ever lower into the most wretched possible existence and do nothing while that happens. What kind of human beings are we if we let that happen to us? To be worthy of the name human being, we have to take it for ourselves, that status. I'm a human. I refuse the place you've allotted for me in this system as the permanent victim and the permanent underclass. I have the ability to get the knowledge I need to be part of making the change, and I'm going to do it. And I wish we didn't have to start from here. It's a difficult, hard position, but that is also how revolutions are made, Garland. Revolutions are made when enough people realize that they've got nothing left to lose and everything to gain, and this system is not theirs, and the ruling class doesn't speak for them. There's not one nation. One of the great problems we have is we let ourselves identify our interests with the interests of the ruling class. How often do you hear commentators say things like, well, all of these regime change operations or all of these wars, they're not in America's interest. Well, which America are you talking about? Because clearly they are in the interests of the oligarchs who benefit, in whose interests the US state is run. So you can't just say America like there's one America. There's the American ruling class, the American finance capitalists, and there's the American workers. What's in the interests of one is not what's in the interests of the other, and vice versa. So if you want a world where things are run in America in the interests of American workers, you are going to have to change the system. You can't just say, it's not fair, you're not running things in my interests and I'm American. You have to recognize that this state was not set up to serve your interests. And if you want one that is, you're going to have to fight for it.
Well, I'll say this. One of the people in the chat put, MAGA is the revolution. Here's what I would say. The leader of your revolution is the richest man in the world. If you are convinced that the richest man in the world is going to lead a revolution for the working class, I don't even have an end to that sentence. It's like Zen. That's a question that the universe just should rein the answer in. If you're convinced that the richest man in the world is going to lead a revolution that's going to help the working class, and what is his first move? By firing hundreds of thousands of working class people, while a bunch of other working class people cheer on, hooray, the richest man in the world is firing hundreds of thousands of working class people. Boy, now we're going in the right direction. If you think that that's the move that's going to help out the working class, as I said, that's a question like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? It's a Zen question. Just take it and move on. And at some point, you're going to look in the mirror and say, perhaps I was, I wasn't thinking in the right direction. Look, one of the things I've said, I did a big conspiracy, and I said, look, they'll fire these people with the plans on, the big plan in corporations, fire all the employees and replace them with what they're calling AI, right? Just with a computer program that's not really going to work. You know how that works. You call the government, hey, I just got a letter that says I owe $12 billion in taxes. I think the decimal point is in the wrong. I actually only owe $12. And the machine will say, would you like to pay your $12 billion tax bill with an ATM credit card or straight from your bank account? And you'll be like, no, can I talk to somebody? There are numerous ways you can pay your $12 billion tax bill. How would you like to pay? There'll be nowhere you can go. There'll be nothing you can call because they laid off any person who could actually read it and say, oh, the decimal point was in the wrong place. And at some point, it gets so bad that they say, and I've heard this term, UBI. Everybody will get a universal basic income. And all these lefties are like, yeah, we'll finally get. And I'm like, if in fact the government, who used to tell us, well, the government should just give things to poor people because then they won't want to work and they'll be lazy. They use that excuse when they want to get rid of all of the social programs that actually we pay for and help us. But if in fact the government's now saying our system no longer can create the jobs that the working class need to feed their families, so we'll just give you a few bucks. And what's going to happen? Like your phone pops up and every month you've got whatever, I'm just throwing a number, $4,000 in there. You then take that and then you pay, since you can't own a home, you're only renting and it's owned by BlackRock. You then pay BlackRock their rent. You then pay Verizon on Fios for your whatever. You pay them for your cable. You pay, and when you get finished, they gave you $4,000 a month, and $3,999 of it went right back to the same corporations that are owned by the same monopolistic oligarchs. They didn't give you a dime. The appearance of money popped up on your phone, and that money went right back to them, and they call that a universal basic income. No, it's just more income for them. You get the last word.
There's a couple of things on Garland on that. Sorry. One is on this UBI question. It is absolutely only something that could possibly happen. I don't think it is going to happen in any big country. But if it did, it can only happen as a result of basically accepting that we've outsourced all of the wealth creating jobs, like you said. So we're going to give you basic level existence money, but you accept in return that you're a parasite forever. And that's it. You don't make anything. You don't do anything useful or important. You just consume. We give you some money and you spend it back. You spend it back with us. Right. You decide whether you're going to have healthcare or education for your kids with your money. It's up to you. It's your choice. Your choice. Spend your money how you like. Spend your time how you like within these parameters, right? But it can only happen in an imperialist country. It can only happen in an imperialist country because you've got to have super profits from extracting the loot from the rest of the world to be able to pay a whole layer of parasitic people to just exist. And it's an open admission that that's what your economy has become. I mean, that is what our economies have become, but it's an open admission of that. And for a class to accept that, for working people to embrace it, for left-wing people, for God's sake, to hold this up like some kind of liberation, that we become an openly parasitic layer that just says, yeah, I won't complain about anything in the world if you give me enough money to sit here and be a vegetable. It's disgusting on every level you can possibly imagine. And I find it particularly disgusting that it's presented by the left as some kind of wonderful. It shows you how bought off the left in the West has become, that they just openly embrace imperialism. I'll be a parasite. Yep. Give me $50. I mean, it's just disgusting.
And add this, even the word basic, that means we're going to give you just enough to be extremely poor and desperate, but you're still going to, and here's the thing, are you really going to be able to lay around? No. You're still going to have to go work at these nothing jobs for next to nothing, because this is going to be a basic income. It'll be just enough to barely keep a roof over your head and that you can have a little bit of gruel every now and then, right? But you're still going to have to work at a crap job doing next to nothing. So they'll still be able to use your labor up for basically nothing. And they can excuse paying you. They can then say, well, of course, we're only paying you $5 an hour. Of course, you barely make nothing, but you have a universal basic income to cover the basics. And now you can work still 3 or 4 jobs because you want you and your children to have, you want a little bit more. You want more than the basics for you and your children. And so you're still going to work 3 jobs making nothing, but now we'll give you enough so you won't be in the street and we can stave off revolution. All that is a way for them to stave off revolution a little bit longer.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's very much like the Victorian poor laws in 19th century England, where, you know, basically the state would subsidize the very poorest people through the poor laws, which were issued in various parishes. You know, the local councils had to administer it. And basically what it meant was, and it was kind of widely noted, that what was really happening was they were does this sound familiar? They were topping up the income of people who worked, but whose salaries were such starvation level that they actually couldn't exist. So these were the people who were being paid through the poor laws. That wasn't who they were originally designed for, but what it ended up being was a subsidy to employers. You know, like housing benefit became a subsidy to landlords. You know, you have to understand, under capitalism, the workers don't get nothing for nothing. There's always a way. There's always a way where the money that you think is coming to you is being funneled straight back to the ruling class. They're making hay out of it, and you're groveling around on the floor for pennies. Just very quickly, I just wanted to finish with this, Garland. The crisis is deepening. The mass of the people are getting more impoverished, and that's building anger. That could very well lead to a revolutionary situation. Ultimately, it will. The ruling class understands that, and that's why it feeds us with distractions. You can name thousands of them. The ways it tries to distract us and keep us busy, whether it's, you know, fashion or pornography or 1,000 other things, computer games, you know, there's a million things to just keep you looking the other way. Lies and division. These are the tools, these are the weapons the ruling class uses to keep us from getting together and fighting for our own interests. And this question of division is really, really important, because a whole load of good, well-meaning, sincere people, angry workers who want change, who need change, have been suckered in by the lies of the MAGA project into taking the side or feeling that one section of the ruling class represents them against another section of the ruling class, and that other section of the ruling class is herding another section of the working class behind them. And they're turning politics into like a baseball game, a war between the two groups, and keeping us idiots fighting one another underneath in their interests. In their interests, not in ours. Not in ours. The change we need does not come this way. The change we need comes when we break from these lies, these distractions, these divisions, these distortions, where we educate ourselves. And I will going to put in a plug now for my party's education program. There is no substitute for knowledge if you really want to start to make a difference, genuinely make a difference, and not just get suckered into wasting your time and precious life's energy on supporting the interests of a class which is totally hostile to you and your family and your future. You've got to get educated. On my party's website, there's a learn section. We have an education program. There's everything from, little introductory videos on all the important subjects right up to, full, deep Marxist books. There's no way around getting yourself educated if we're going to change these things. Marxism is the liberation ideology of the working class. And when we grasp it, there's nothing that's going to be able to stop us.
Joti Brar, you also have a website, right? I mean, YouTube, right?
We do,
YouTube.
we do. So my party's website is thecommunists.org. You can see that there. Please go there and read our news and analysis and look at our education program. I'm on Telegram, Joti Brar. My party is on Telegram, The Communists. And on YouTube, we have a channel called Proletarian TV, where we have like 15, 16, 17, 18 years worth of amazing presentations and analysis on all the important topics. So it's a really good place to start your education.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Don't forget, share this on all your social media platforms. Follow me on YouTube. Follow me or subscribe on you. Follow and subscribe on YouTube. You can become a member. Follow me on Rockfin, and of course, follow me on Rumble, just in case any of the others platforms fall through. Thanks a lot, everybody. Share this everywhere. Have a great day. We're out.